let's get started with our panel. We're going to be talking about public-private partnerships. We know that Brazil and many countries on the African continent have faced many challenges in terms of significant investments, and these have limited the growth opportunities. This is a general situation, and we know that public-private partnerships in this type of scenario can help and make things actually get into motion. In Portuguese, we say make things walk, so get them moving. So we have a panel here of all Portuguese speakers. We have Portuguese from Brazil, from Portugal, and from Mozambique. So 3 countries where Portuguese is spoken, and the language is one of the things that unites us, and that can also be a tool for partnerships, one of the similarities that we have. In preparation for this panel, I read some studies, recent studies from the World Bank, and I'm going to start with Miguel. Before the panel, I chatted with each of the members here to get some ideas about this topic. And Miguel, I'd like to talk to you about what is the role of governments in these public-private partnerships. One of the studies I read from the World Bank was not only about what is needed for these projects to be executed, is the money, the capital, but also a favorable regulatory environment. So what is the role of governments when it comes to these public-private partnerships? Okay. Well, thank you very much, and to my co-panel members, thank you. So let's start out talking about the role of the government and then of the operators of these partnerships, we could say. And then sometimes I also like to talk about the role of the capital markets and the investors in making these partnerships happen. Well, in relation to the governments, I think there are 2 most important levels. So the governments have to believe or have to want to make these partnerships happen. And by this I mean of giving up the control of these assets, because when you enter a partnership, it's not, you're going to control everything. It is a partnership. There are 2 sides. If it is a partnership, it has to, you have to have the goal of being financially sustainable and profitable, and so the asset has to be managed in an from an economic standpoint, not a political standpoint. And so once you enter into the partnership, you do have to assume some of these costs and expenses. The government has to act according to the rules that are defined. In English, it's called the rule of law. So they have to be institutions that are set up to make sure that the transactions are secure and stable. Well, yesterday, the economic Nobel Prize was given to 3 different economists, and it's based on this topic, how nations can become wealthy based on the rule of law. So these are the 3 areas where, the 3 things that government has to follow. When I've worked with public-private partnerships, it has to be a partnership, because sometimes it just becomes an easy way for the private companies to make money. So the governments have to be strong enough to deal with this situation. They have to guarantee that its agents are independent and are going to defend the interests of the government, not of the private sector. And then the third point is that they have to realize that the public-private partnerships are set up to create assets that aren't necessarily profitable. So the government's contribution distribution has to be very well defined so that it isn't just a way for making the private player wealthier. So I think the main point of the main partner in this relationship has to be the government, because the operators, now I'm thinking in the African context. For example, in a European context, these public-private partnerships happened with assets that were already existent. So it's much easier. It's just to monetize an asset that already exists. But in Africa, everything has to start or be created from zero. It's not to disrupt anything, it's to erupt it. So we have to have operators that know how to work, that have the know-how, that know how to work in a partnership, that are able to deliver on time and on budget and on quality, which many times does not happen. So you have to find the right operators, the right players. And to be very honest, this isn't easy in Africa in most countries, because what happens many times is that you find a foreign operator, American or Chinese or European, and then what I said before, the government isn't ready for this negotiation, and so the private player has wealth and is making money in an unfair way. And so, since we're talking about African, I'm Portuguese. I'm going to give you the example of a Portuguese company. I don't work with this company, but I know them very well. It's called Mota. And Mota is a huge operator in public-private partnerships in Africa. First of all, in the Portuguese-speaking countries in Africa, now Nigeria, Kenya, Uganda. And so it's an operator that brought its experience from operating in Europe and then transferred that to the construction business in Africa. And so this is a great example of how these public-private partnerships can be done. Sorry, I think I've said too much. No, that's great. This is a good moment then to turn the word over to Mr. Ibrahimo. I've lived in Portugal for many years, and in Brazil we say, Brazilian Portuguese we say na África, and in European Portuguese we say em África. Okay.
Miguel mentioned Nigeria, which is a country that concentrates many of the initiatives of PPP, and there's a concentration in other countries as well, such as South Africa, Morocco, Ghana. So it's to focus on those who managed to set up a more regulated, favorable environment. But when you think about the whole thing of characteristics suitable to the development of partnerships, how is it today? Thank you. I can start by greeting my colleagues in the panel and also thank Dr. João Bosco for the invitation. I think it is not possible to have a reflection about regulation in Africa by ignoring specific realities from the macroeconomic, social, and political aspects, because the region of Africa is a very specific one, and it needs those PPPs. The examples that we had now emphasizes that. It is not possible to think about regulation in the domains of PPPs, public-private partnerships, before making it clear that there are some barriers that condition those PPPs. For example, ways that it's not possible to make it go further. And why does Africa need it? Because its macroeconomy does not allow that the fiscal budgets can invest in the domain of infrastructure. So we need PPPs. But you have to bear in mind that we need aspects such as good governance, as well as corruption, which is a barrier for the establishment of partnerships, as well as we cannot ignore that in Africa it is necessary to have a good capacity building of employees to negotiate. As Miguel was saying, many times this negotiation is not present. Many times they send everything ready just to be signed. So what is necessary to attenuate those factors? The government shall want to do it. Another aspect is that it is necessary to have a good governance. Everything that allows a check and balance of the things, and it's necessary many times that the government will take over some kind of partnership. Some local companies many times that are suggested by the government when there are families of governors in those companies. So the very institutions, international institutions or banks, either national or international banks, are resistant to negotiate this way. So those PPPs that banks called as PEPs many times prevent a good negotiation to build good PPPs. And I'll stop at this point. All right, everybody is willing to make participation move forward. Now, Mônica, e daí you mentioned the international banks, speaking about the African scenario, and we can think about the international scenario, how the groups get together. Mônica will leave, and tonight she's going to go to the BRICS summit, so it's important to talk about BRICS now. So Brazil is going to have an intense agenda in 2025 in terms of international events. So what do you see that can be a potential when Brazil gets the presidency of BRICS? So what would be the potential at this moment in terms of fostering PPPs between Brazil and African countries? Good afternoon. I'd like to greet Professor João, who can gather people in one more event. Long life to this event. When I see more countries coming, I am so happy because I know how difficult it is to connect different people and different ideas. Greetings to my colleagues. Carol will mention Unite. The name of the event, it's called Brazil Africa, and when we talk about Africa, we have several Africas, several countries, as well as in Brazil when you talk about Latin America. Many times I talk to African people. How many countries do you know of your continent? Knowing that the strength, and when we unite all the countries in the continent, but it's so diverse from the colonization, decolonization, and the history and the government, so we cannot put it all together into a single name, as well as Brazil and Latin America are so different with different social, economic aspects. So when we talk about families that are more here than there, we have to take care of that, because the United States is also like that. The society, when it was formed, they were the children of families, and the society was maturing, becoming a society with rules and things. One thing that is for sure, you had to be united, to unite the whole Africa, so it can be strong. BRICS encompasses South Africa. I will take over the presidency of the Women's Business Alliance in BRIC, and we have two new members, Egypt and Ethiopia. Two fantastic women that are coming to the group now, and we are measured differently from G20 or other movements. We are measured by the business that we do among us women, with our own companies or entities that are led by women. Just to give an idea, in the United States, every 5 women, only out of every 5 companies that export, just 1 is led by a woman. And I'll not say the figures of Brazil because you're going to be sad about that. As my colleague said, the government must want to do things, and the government really needs to want. The current government is wanting to do things. They're showing this through the Brazilian Agency of Export. They are measuring how many women export. It's very little. I was talking to Ibrahim, my colleague. Today, people still ask questions that in 2024 wouldn't be possible anymore. Let me give an example to shock you. When you get pregnant, who's going to pay your debt? As well as other questions that I will not mention because it's unbearable. So our first problem is to have more resources, different resources, so women can get there. So why do women need to get there? Why don't you let things the way they are now? Well, because the world will be much better when we have more balance, including balance in gender balance. Monica, by the way, we can talk about credit, which is another topic that we have mentioned in previous events. So you mentioned credit lines. There is also a policy to establish partnerships or PPP. In Brazil, we're still cradling in this area. They mentioned PAC, the Program of Accelerated Growth. There should be some women engineers working for PAC, but they don't. So it's concentrated now. So let's try to share this. We don't have it. We don't have the credit, the difference in credit. Many state banks should have targets to bring credits to women. We still have a long way to go. This group is here to bring new funds that will invest in women who build infrastructure, not women only in the social area. We are all already ruling this area. No, we want to build things, and we have great female builders. You can bet on that. We have great female engineers. We have women's companies, women that are doing energy transition in lithium that is part of your batteries. Almost all of them are led by women in the presidency, so we have a lot to do in this segment, giving concessions to women as well, but we have to open doors, and we count on the partnership of men such as Bosco, who's here, allowing me to speak here now. So we have to have differentiated credit in the area of construction of any country. Okay, continuing with another woman that is part of our panel, Ambassador Maria Auxiliadora, that is working in the International Affairs, Secretariat of International Affairs of the City Administration of São Paulo, working with destatization and partnerships. So Ambassador, Mrs. Ambassador, we can look at São Paulo as a big metropolis, not only for Brazil, but at international level. We can look at São Paulo and see what the city has been doing to attract companies' interest towards the city to make some PPPs moving forward. So how is this work going in terms of valuing those partnerships? I think São Paulo has no problems. When there is a product, there are many manifestations of interest. The hard thing is to choose among them all, among the candidates, because everybody is willing to participate. Everybody, I mean, the private sector, if they can take part, if they see an opportunity of profit, although public-private partnership not always give you profit, and you have to use the private sector to give the concession. But concession is more profitable than PPP. In a PPP, the way it is defined by the city administration, the profit is always very low. So there is the need of having some money coming from the city administration that wouldn't be as much as if the city administration would have to do everything. So when São Paulo started with de-estatization, it was very easy. I mean, it was hard to define the terms. There were many studies being done, the creation of several companies, stakeholders, São Paulo Parceria, São Paulo Regula, because several autarchies outside the city administration were created to follow the process. So there was an intellectual work to calling people that was very important, in such a way that when you have the definition of priorities or definition of what is going to be where the de-estatization is going to happen, there is no problem having people interested. There are always people interested in São Paulo. So this is not a problem, not even in terms of financing, because the private sector in São Paulo has resources. The biggest problem is following up the projects and see how that was done. In the case of Enel, for instance, it's not São Paulo who is responsible for the federal government. It is the regulating agencies that do not belong to the city administration. And there are problems there. There are problems, and the mayor is asking to breach this contract. But we're trying to see what we can do. The agreement is not being fulfilled by the concessionaire. The follow-up is key to maintenance of the process. Now, Ibrahim, when you look at the scenario in African countries, when you think about all the steps that needs to be taken to make a PPP really work and move forward, what are the elements that you have to bear in mind when you put together an APP? You gotta have a regulatory environment, and what are the factors that are key for the execution of a successful PPP? Well, first of all, you gotta have a clear legislation that is easy to understand and that does not lead to misinterpretations. Second aspect is that the concession agreements that are established have to be agreements that foresee with clarity the beginning and the end of the concession of a given infrastructure, which means that you have to predict all the details, and the government, once they make a commitment, they have to believe that and make that what is in the agreement be fulfilled. So this allows a certain future stability for the investor. When they look at a clear legislation and clear conditions as a guarantee, as a security for the future. It happens sometimes, and that creates some retraction from investors, that in the middle of the process, the government changes the rules. And when this happens, investors are suspicious with the process. On the other hand, we need some aspects such as information that are capacity building are necessary for all players in the project, because all of them have to be in tune and going in the same direction. Do we have an online participation? There's a voice coming in as well. Okay, sorry. On the other hand, there are aspects that seems to be minor aspects, but they are actually very important. For example, an investor wants to see in a clear way how the exports of their counterparties or dividends that they have, how they are repatriated, how they are exported. And on the other hand as well, simple things such as the concession of visa to the workers, because many times African countries do not have internal capacity to serve those projects. So we have many labor coming from abroad, but many times the government makes it more difficult to receive those workers coming and going from the countries. So I have to stop my considerations here. So what makes investors to be suspicious or to give a step back or to make a step forward? So let's look at the role of the markets, capital markets and investors, once there is an environment that is secure enough for a step forward. What is the right environment for that? Well, let's talk about Africa. The need of imports in Africa of capital is very big. So I have to attract capital. But the problem of attracting capital is that the countries that have to attract capital, they shall have a macroeconomic policy that gives solidity and confidence to the investments. Africa is always a dispute between the macro premium, which is the quality of the project, the business person, the company, that are always very high, and the macro discount, which is usually macroeconomy of the most of the countries. This has been like that in the past few years, including big economies that foresees massive devaluation that prevents any return to come. So if an investor has this fear because the macroeconomic policy is not stable, we don't have capital, and if we don't have capital, there is no PPE, no new projects, not anything.
Aspect is essential, as Ibrahim said, and I agree 100% with that. If we live in a world where that problem is solved, then the capital comes, it appears, because the infrastructure in the rest of the world, or in many parts in the rest of the world, there's a lot of capital available to be invested in infrastructure. It's a class of assets that is highly visible, it's stable, it's long-term, so it's very attractive. But it shouldn't be this way. But the truth is that it's the economic stability that in these, or the instability in many African countries that ends up getting in the way of these investments coming to Africa. And the largest investor or largest investment fund in infrastructure on a global level, it's the GIP, Global Infrastructure Partners. This fund was founded by an African. by a Nigerian. And so this is so contradictory, so ironic, but the problem with the currency stability has caused this problem. So investors aren't a problem. It's very difficult. Having access to capital is essential, but in order for that to happen, you have to have these macroeconomic policies in place to guarantee that there won't be a currency fatality that would happen to do away with the investment. So the money is there in these infrastructure investors around the world. They are very long in terms of capital and short on investment opportunity. And Africa is actually the opposite. It's very short on capital and very long on opportunities. So this marriage has to happen. Well, and we've been hearing about the potential of this marriage for many years. Unfortunately, I can't remember which of our participants mentioned this morning, but Mônica, we talked about BNDES and how it could help to make these projects with African projects happen. Considering your experience and what Miguel just shared, what do you think is missing to tie the knot there to, have this wedding happen? Well, what Miguel said about legal security, I'm working in a group that is coming into Brazil. It's a group of $200 billion, an American broadcasting network, and they are only coming into Brazil because of the stability of the partner that is bringing this project to Brazil. And they have the editing process that it's trustworthy, and because there is stability offered by our government, by the economic situation. So the stability is a very important factor. Legal stability, I think this is the basis, the foundation for any type of business, to believe that the rules of the game are going to be followed. Brazil is at a very good moment and for attracting investments from foreign companies. We have new investments coming in, not only to São Paulo, but as the ambassador said, in São Paulo we don't have as many problems with gathering funds and resources. But even in the Northeast, we do have some projects and some funds that are being captured. I work in the private sector, so I can say this and speak to this. I think, they're the politics. That's part of the game. That's a normal thing. But we're always trying to reach this political stability, the legal stability, which is what we need. But the opportunities for the BRICS countries are great. We have new countries coming in, and we're going to be the leaders next year. There are many events, and I hope the Brazil-Africa Institute can partner with us and bring some companies that would like to invest. But Ibrahimo said that every government has to have this exchange, and it needs to flow easily. I've worked with some industry segments like the steel industry that have some of these protections in place. So, we don't have everything open to open. We do need to protect our industry. So I think it's important to analyze the market. What are our natural, resources that we have at home? And then this is part of the legal security, part of, having a safe home. It can't be the open market for everyone. You do have to analyze what we have, what are our natural resources, and have a win-win situation for both sides, public and private. Well, going back to Africa, many countries in the African continent have prepared this environment. So everything has to be, legal, to have that security so that there aren't any surprises, unpleasant surprises. And so what are some examples, if we could think about some examples that are innovative models? For example, we've talked about Nigeria, Morocco, Ghana, but are there any examples of innovation of some countries that have just started to prepare themselves for this environment of public-private partnerships? Well, yes. maybe before talking about some concrete examples, I would like to say that it's very important that the investors that are going to enter into these private-public partnerships in the African continent, they must have the willingness to leave something there. And in that sense, it's important there are cases and concrete examples. So there's a certain change in the PPP environment, which is when it happens with local, small, and mid-sized businesses. And many times you say, but wait, isn't that a contradiction? So you have these, if these smaller companies don't have the capital, how can they participate in a private-public partnership? But many times they can in these infrastructure products. On the other hand, there are some examples. They aren't all bad examples. We have some success cases in Africa. Just let me take a look here at my cheat sheet. So when it comes to transportation, there's in 2018, 6,800 kilometers from Ethiopia to another city, Mombasa to Nairobi, 452 kilometers. It's another success came in the energy domain. Zambia, Tanzania, Kenya, 1,370 kilometers. It's another example of power transfer. And in roads, in a highway, in 4 countries in North Africa, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Namibia. I can't remember exactly how many kilometers, but there are concrete cases, success cases in Africa. Ibrahim, I'd just like to add here from a Portuguese-speaking country. It's a recent project. It's a project that has been carried out for decades. 12 years, I remember going off-road on this road that has now been built. And we can get, there's mining being done from the south of DRC to Zambia, and that comes through to Angola to the Lubito port. And it's a PPP, actually. And it's more in the area of construction, but is a huge project that can transform a large part of the African continent. Well, coming back to São Paulo now, our ambassador has told us about this environment of integration. And so the ambassador mentioned what or how São Paulo was prepared to be part of these private-public partnerships, so that these projects can be monitored. So how has the city of São Paulo been able to maintain this? Okay, this project, you said things are going well, so how can that be maintained? And how can some things be changed or maybe improved to attract more projects? So São Paulo is very attractive, but how can it be improved? Well, I wanted to talk about a meeting that's going to happen tomorrow. It will only be in Portuguese because they are all national partners, but they are going to analyze what São Paulo has done. In terms of the regulations, we have SP Regula, which is a tool to monitor the contracts to make sure that the money is going to be paid correctly, that there won't be any problems with the credit that's being offered. So there are different elements that have been created to guarantee and put investors at ease. So we're having this meeting tomorrow where our executive secretary of partnerships is going to talk about what we have been doing here in São Paulo with some of the concessionaires also. That, for example, from Ibirapuera Park, the Anhembi, complex. They will be speaking about these partnerships. You can follow it online if anybody's interested. You can get the link from me. Okay, so this is an invitation for everyone here. Yes, because São Paulo did a lot of hard work in creating these laws and policies in order to make investors feel safe in this investment, because there is this interest and demand, and we need to make a selection of who is going to win these bids for these PPPs, and São Paulo has to offer guarantees. So tomorrow we are going to have this meeting to share our experience with other cities in Brazil, and we have a good budget for this. It's the fourth largest budget in the country for the city of São Paulo. Yes, and when we talk about the guarantees, we come back here to this exchange, right, Miguel? So when these agreements are established, so then we talk about what is going to be the legacy, what's going to be left to these cities from these partnerships. Is there anything in this relationship between who is the concessionaire and the concessions? So in the African countries, obviously, but also what happens between Africa and Brazil in terms of what's left? Well, I would say that there is still a lot that we need to do. There are some institutions that have a very important role about this. The DFIs, the European and American DFIs here in Brazil being NDS indirectly, but there's a lot of space for this because at times the private sector is, a little skeptical of offering these guarantees in the long term. So we are talking about 10, 15, 20 years. It's harder. What I have seen is that many times the private sector gives guarantees up to 5 years. After 5, 10, 15 years, then the DFIs come in to complement this financing or this guarantee. But at the end of the day, the quality of the investment and the country where this investment is made they are the ones that are going to establish the conditions. A lot of things have been done. We've had a lot of wins, and we are in a better situation than we were in the past, for sure. So I want to end on a more positive note. Okay, well, I want to say then that we are coming to the end of our panel. It's time flies when we're having a good conversation. So going with this positive note that Miguel left us on, Ibrahimo, I would like to ask you to give your final comment in thinking about what is the spirit of a forum of being future, looking towards the future. What are some of the expectations we can have? Well, agreeing with Mônica and Miguel, I can say that in my experience of almost 10 years as a bank CEO, when we would analyze the index of credit default, the credit given to women, there was almost no default. This is a huge capital for a tribute to women. Yes, this is improved, right, Mônica? But there's still a lot more to be done. Well, in my bank, at least it was this way. Yes, but next year with our presidency in the BRICS, we have different segments. For example, one event for agriculture, that's one of our goals. I try to follow some of these themes according to each country in the BRICS. Agriculture, technology, we're going to show a lot of startups that are run by women. Biotech also is an area that Brazil is investing in. A lot of businesses from China, South Africa, and South Africa, they have an amazing woman leader, and so we have a lot of connections with Brazilian businesses. And then we have this event, and it ends with the BRICS summit with all the presidents next year, 5 countries and 5 new guest countries. So there's a lot to be doing. Our ambassador, she promotes the city of São Paulo, but she also connects Brazil with the rest of the world. So this is a challenge for you, Ambassador, to bring the WBA group. We have some states asking for the event to go there. Maybe also the finance meeting here to São Paulo to discuss more investments that can be made, and especially for the businesses run by women. Oh, Ambassador, please. Well, São Paulo has, the city government has more female employees than male employees. It's much higher than 50% in women who are employees, and in the higher levels, 30% in the upper levels in the employee, which is much higher than many other city governments. So we have been doing a good job in that. Well, then just a final word then, Miguel, I'm going to ask you to reply to the invitation that you received from Mônica. So please give us your final word. Well, my final comment is very simple. At this forum, we always meet new people. We have new experiences. We're always learning new things. And so related to this topic, in terms of the female presence in the business world, in the bank where I work, at Citi, in the basis, it's 50-50, male and female employees in terms of when we hire. But when we look at the top of the pyramid, it's not 50-50. The system ends up kicking out women when you get higher up in the hierarchy. So there's still many challenges. Even though we have 50-50 at the bottom of the pyramid, we can do much better at the top. Being a father of two girls, well, I am have the advantage of understanding this challenge. Well, I'm very happy for the discussion we had. It could be very boring, intense. It ended up being very hopeful, and we ended with the development of the equality between men and women in the workplace. Yes, Mônica said we aren't only discussing gender equality. We need to discuss this for all areas, you know. It's the better way to attack and find solutions for the problems. Yes, I agree 100%. Thank you so much to all of the members here of our panel for your contributions, for the privilege of talking to you today. It's been a pleasure.